Do not trust the man behind you. 8 words. That was all the note said. Yet the moment Ethan Caldwell read them, the conversation around him seemed to disappear. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses. Everything faded into the background as his eyes returned to the small folded piece of paper resting beside his plate. He read the sentence again, then once more. Across the table, investors and executives continued discussing a business deal worth nearly $2 billion. No one noticed the change in his expression. No one noticed the sudden stillness in his posture. And no one noticed the young black waitress quietly walking away from the table as if she had done nothing unusual at all. Ethan slipped the note beneath his hand and looked around the dining room without moving his head. The Sterling Prime was one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan. Located high above the city skyline, it attracted politicians, celebrities, athletes, and business leaders from around the country. Every table represented influence. Every conversation represented opportunity. Tonight was supposed to be one of the most important nights of Ethan's career. At 40 years old, he had built Caldwell Technologies into one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. Financial magazines called him brilliant. Investors called him visionary. Competitors called him dangerous. Success had become so normal that most days felt predictable. Yet nothing about this moment felt predictable. Ethan casually lifted his water glass and scanned the room. His eyes moved from table to table until they settled on the area directly behind him. Several guests were seated there. An older businessman wearing a gray suit. 2 younger executives discussing numbers on a tablet. A couple celebrating an anniversary. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing explained the warning. Ethan lowered his glass. For a moment, he considered crumpling the note and forgetting about it. People sent strange messages to powerful individuals all the time. Anonymous emails, threats, conspiracy theories, attention seekers. He had seen it all before. But something about this felt different. The handwriting was calm, precise. Whoever wrote it wanted him to take it seriously. More importantly, the waitress had not lingered to watch his reaction. She had not tried to explain herself. She had not appeared nervous. She simply delivered the note and continued working. That detail bothered him. People who lied usually wanted attention. People telling the truth often wanted distance. Ethan looked across the dining room until he spotted her again. She was serving another table near the windows overlooking the Hudson River. Her black apron was neatly tied. Her posture was professional. Her movements were efficient and confident. She looked like someone focused on doing her job. Yet somehow she had become the most interesting person in the room. Around him, the meeting continued. Lawyers reviewed documents. Investors discussed timelines. One executive raised a toast to future success. Ethan forced himself to smile and participate, but his attention remained divided. The note sat in his pocket like a weight. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The more he tried to ignore it, the more impossible it became. Finally, he pushed his chair back. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to take a quick call." Nobody questioned him. Billionaire CEOs disappeared from meetings all the time. Ethan walked slowly across the dining room. He had no destination in mind. He only knew he needed answers. As he approached the service area, he saw the waitress placing menus onto a shelf. She looked up and met his gaze. For the first time that evening, their eyes locked. Ethan expected uncertainty. Instead, he saw something else. Concern. Real concern. The kind that could not be faked. Before he could speak, she glanced toward the dining room and then back at him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You should not be sitting at that table tonight." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "Why?" he asked. The waitress hesitated for only a second. Then she answered, "Because the people smiling at you are not all on your side." The waitress held his gaze for a moment, then looked away as a group of customers approached her station. Her expression remained calm, but Ethan could see the tension behind it. This was not someone seeking attention. This was someone carrying information she wished she did not have. "What exactly do you mean?" Ethan asked quietly. Naomi glanced toward the dining room. "Not here." Her answer came immediately. "Then where?" Ethan pressed. 5 minutes, she said. "Near the east observation window." Before he could ask another question, she picked up a tray and walked away, returning to her duties as though the conversation had never happened. Ethan stood there for several seconds. The sounds of the restaurant returned around him. Laughter, music, conversations about money, investments, and success. Yet everything felt different now. He looked back toward his table. Executives were discussing numbers projected on a tablet screen. Lawyers were reviewing documents. Investors were smiling confidently. On the surface, it looked like a perfect evening. Underneath, uncertainty had begun to spread. Ethan returned to his seat. "Everything all right?" asked Daniel Mercer, the company's chief financial officer. Daniel had worked alongside Ethan for more than a decade. He was one of the few people Ethan trusted completely. "Fine," Ethan replied. "Just needed some air." Daniel nodded and returned to the discussion. The meeting continued, but Ethan found himself studying the people around him differently. He noticed who spoke the most, who remained quiet, who watched others before giving an opinion. Small details that normally escaped attention suddenly seemed important. Success had taught him how to read markets. Tonight, he found himself reading people. 20 minutes later, he excused himself again and walked toward the observation area overlooking the river. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking view of Manhattan. Thousands of lights reflected across the dark water below. Naomi was already there. She stood alone beside the glass, her black apron neatly tied, her posture straight. When Ethan approached, she turned toward him. "Thank you for coming," she said. Ethan folded his arms. "You have my attention. Start talking." Naomi took a slow breath. "I overheard a conversation about an hour ago." "Between who?" Ethan asked. "I do not know every name," she admitted, "but I recognized one person." Ethan waited. "Someone from your table." A cold feeling settled in his chest. "And what did you hear?" Naomi looked toward the dining room entrance before answering. "Words. Fragments. Not enough to understand everything. Such as, board vote. Control. Tomorrow morning." Ethan frowned. Those words were connected directly to the merger discussions taking place tonight. "Anything else?" Naomi hesitated. "One man said the deal would give them exactly what they needed." Ethan remained silent. "Another man said you still believed everything was under control." Her eyes met his. "That was the moment I knew they were talking about you." Ethan stared out at the city. Logic told him this could be a misunderstanding, an innocent conversation taken out of context. Yet something about Naomi's certainty made that explanation difficult to accept. "Why tell me?" he finally asked. Naomi looked surprised by the question. "Because if someone was talking about me that way, I would want to know." Ethan almost smiled. Such a simple answer. No hidden agenda. No request for money. No attempt to impress him. Just honesty. Then his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. A message from Daniel Mercer. "Where are you? The investors are asking for you." Ethan stared at the words for several seconds. Then he slowly looked back at Naomi. "Who was the person from my table?" Naomi lowered her voice. "The man sitting directly behind you when I gave you the note was talking to someone else." She paused. But the person they kept mentioning by name was Daniel. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass while the words settled heavily in his mind. Daniel. Out of all the names Naomi could have mentioned, it was the one he least expected to hear. Daniel Mercer had been with him almost from the beginning. When Caldwell Technologies operated out of a cramped office with secondhand furniture and uncertain prospects, Daniel had been there. When investors walked away, when projects failed, when competitors predicted the company would collapse, Daniel stayed. Trust like that was not built overnight. It was earned through years of shared victories and setbacks, which was exactly why Naomi's warning felt impossible to accept. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket. "You are sure?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "I heard the name several times. That does not mean he is involved." "I know," she replied. "That is why I did not accuse him of anything." Ethan studied her expression. There was no excitement in her eyes. No satisfaction. If anything, she looked uncomfortable, like someone carrying a burden she never wanted. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Naomi took a slow breath. "About an hour before you arrived, I was helping prepare one of the private dining rooms. A group of men came in earlier than expected. They thought nobody else was there." Ethan listened carefully. "I was collecting menus when I heard part of their conversation. I was not trying to listen. It was impossible not to hear." She paused briefly. "One of them mentioned tomorrow's board vote. Another said everything depended on keeping you focused on the merger." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "And Daniel?" Naomi nodded. "They spoke about him as though he was helping coordinate something." Ethan looked away. Every instinct urged him to dismiss the story. Yet another part of him remembered the note. The calm certainty in Naomi's voice. The fact that she had nothing to gain by telling him any of this. Why not report it to management, he asked. Naomi smiled sadly. And tell them what? That I overheard fragments of a conversation between wealthy businessmen. She shook her head. Nobody would take that seriously. Ethan knew she was right. The people attending tonight's event controlled companies, investment funds, and political influence. A waitress making accusations without evidence would be ignored immediately. Then why risk your job? Naomi looked out toward the river. For a moment, she seemed far away. Because my father once ignored a warning. Ethan remained silent. Someone tried to tell him that his business partner was not being honest. He trusted the wrong person because he thought loyalty guaranteed integrity. Her eyes returned to his. It cost him everything. The honesty in her voice made it difficult to look away. Ethan suddenly realized this was not really about him. It was about a lesson she had learned years ago and never forgotten. A lesson she was trying to spare someone else from repeating. Before Ethan could respond, movement near the entrance caught Naomi's attention. Her expression changed instantly. Do not turn around yet, she said quietly. Ethan froze. Why? Because the man who was sitting behind you just walked into the observation area. Ethan kept his eyes forward. Are you sure? Naomi nodded. And he is not alone. Ethan felt his pulse quicken slightly. Who was with him? Naomi watched carefully for another second. Then her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Daniel Mercer. Naomi kept her eyes fixed on the reflection in the glass rather than turning around. Ethan followed her lead. The observation area was quiet compared to the main dining room, but sound still carried across the polished floor and towering windows. What are they doing? Ethan asked softly. Naomi watched for another moment. Talking. Can you hear them? She shook her head. Not from here. Ethan stared at the river beyond the glass. His mind was racing. Part of him wanted to walk directly toward Daniel and demand answers. Another part warned him to slow down. A conversation was not proof. Suspicion was not evidence. 12 years of trust deserved more than a reckless accusation. Yet the timing felt impossible to ignore. Daniel had texted him only minutes earlier asking where he was. Now he was standing in a quiet corner of the restaurant with the same man Naomi had seen earlier. Ethan took a slow breath. I need to know more. Naomi nodded. Then do not let them know you are suspicious. Ethan almost smiled. It was the same advice he would have given during a negotiation. You sound like a corporate strategist. No, Naomi replied. I sound like someone who watches people for a living. The answer surprised him. She was right. Every day she observed customers. Their moods. Their habits. Their reactions. Most people assumed a waitress only carried plates. Few realized how much she noticed. Across the room, Daniel and the older businessman began moving toward a private corridor leading away from the observation area. Naomi's eyes narrowed. They are leaving. Ethan straightened. Where does that hallway go? Private dining rooms and conference suites. Ethan knew the restaurant occasionally hosted confidential meetings for executives and public figures. The spaces were designed specifically for conversations that people did not want overheard. He watched the two men disappear through a set of doors. Seconds later, the hallway was empty again. I should go back, Naomi said. If I disappear too long, management will notice. Ethan nodded. Thank you. Naomi hesitated. Be careful who you trust tonight. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the glow of the restaurant. Ethan remained alone beside the window. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Thousands of lights. Thousands of stories. Yet somehow his world had narrowed to a single question. What was Daniel hiding? His phone vibrated again. This time it was not a message. It was a call. Marcus Reed, head of corporate security at Caldwell Technologies. Ethan answered immediately. Marcus. Sorry to interrupt your dinner, Marcus said. But I thought you should know something. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Go ahead. An unusual request came through our internal systems this afternoon. Ethan listened carefully. What kind of request? Access authorization. Marcus paused. Someone requested confidential board documents that normally require your direct approval. Ethan frowned. Did they get access? No. The request was flagged automatically. Ethan looked toward the private corridor where Daniel had disappeared. Do you know who submitted it? There was a brief silence. That is the strange part, Marcus said. The request came from an executive account. Ethan waited. Whose account? Marcus lowered his voice. Daniel Mercer. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. The restaurant noise seemed distant again. The music, the conversations, the laughter, everything faded behind those two words. Daniel Mercer. Marcus continued. Maybe there is an explanation. I have not raised any concerns yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Ethan stared at the closed hallway doors. You did the right thing. Do you want me to investigate further? Marcus asked. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. The puzzle pieces were no longer scattered randomly. For the first time, they were beginning to connect. Naomi's warning, the private conversation, the board vote, the mysterious comments, the unauthorized document request. None of it proved guilt. But together, they painted a picture he could no longer ignore. Yes, Ethan said quietly. Start digging. And Marcus? Yes. Ethan glanced one last time toward the hallway. Do not tell anyone what you find. When Ethan ended the call, he remained standing beside the observation window for several moments. Below him, traffic flowed through Manhattan like rivers of light. Thousands of people were moving through their evenings without realizing how quickly certainty could disappear. Just 1 hour earlier, he had arrived expecting to celebrate the most important deal of his career. Now he was quietly questioning the loyalty of one of the few people he had trusted completely. Ethan returned to the main dining room with a calm expression. Years in business had taught him a valuable lesson. The moment people sensed that you knew something, they changed their behavior. If Daniel was hiding anything, Ethan could not afford to reveal his suspicions. The dinner continued exactly as before. Investors discussed growth opportunities. Attorneys reviewed schedules for tomorrow's board meeting. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. Everything looked normal. Yet Ethan found himself paying attention to details he would normally ignore. Daniel seemed unusually focused on his phone. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the entrance. Twice he excused himself to answer messages. Small things, ordinary things. Yet combined with everything else, they felt significant. Across the room, Naomi continued working. She carried trays, refilled glasses, and greeted guests with professional courtesy. No one paid special attention to her. That was what made her dangerous to anyone keeping secrets. People spoke freely around someone they considered invisible. An hour later, dessert arrived. The atmosphere relaxed. The hardest negotiations appeared finished. Several investors were already talking about future celebrations. Ethan watched as Daniel checked his watch again. Then his phone vibrated. Daniel looked down at the screen and immediately stood. Excuse me, he said casually. I need to take care of something before I head home. Nobody questioned him. Ethan smiled politely and nodded. Daniel walked toward the same private corridor he had used earlier. Ethan waited 30 seconds before standing himself. I need to make a quick call, he told the table. Again, nobody seemed surprised. He followed at a distance. The hallway was quieter now. Most guests remained inside the dining room. Soft music drifted through the walls as Ethan approached the corridor. Then he heard voices. He stopped instantly. One voice belonged to Daniel. The other belonged to the older businessman Naomi had mentioned. Ethan could not hear every word, but several phrases carried clearly through the partially open doorway. Tomorrow morning. The vote. Once everything is finalized. Ethan moved closer. His pulse remained steady, but his attention sharpened. Then another sentence reached him. He still thinks the merger strengthens his position. The older man laughed softly. Daniel answered immediately. That is exactly why it is working. Ethan felt a chill spread through his chest. The conversation continued. After tomorrow, control shifts naturally, the older man said, and he will never see it coming. Ethan remained motionless. Every instinct told him to walk through the door and confront them. But another voice inside his head urged patience. He needed facts, not assumptions. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from farther down the hallway. Ethan stepped away from the doorway just as a restaurant employee carrying supplies approached. By the time the employee passed, the conference room door had closed completely. The conversation was over. Ethan turned and calmly walked back toward the dining room. His expression never changed. Nobody looking at him would have guessed what he had just heard. Yet inside, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, the possibility of betrayal no longer felt theoretical. It felt real. As he entered the restaurant, his phone vibrated once more. A new message had arrived from Marcus Reed. Ethan opened it immediately. The message contained only one sentence. I found something in the financial records, and you need to see it before tomorrow morning. The message stayed on Ethan's screen as he walked back toward the main dining room. I found something in the financial records, and you need to see it before tomorrow morning. Marcus was not the type of person who overreacted. He had spent years protecting Caldwell Technologies from risks that most executives never even noticed. If he believed something was important, it usually was. Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket and resumed his seat. Around him, the evening was winding down. Investors were discussing flights home. Attorneys were organizing folders. Executives were exchanging final handshakes before tomorrow's board meeting. Everything appeared normal. Yet Ethan now felt as though he were sitting inside a carefully constructed illusion. Daniel Mercer remained at the center of the table, smiling confidently as he spoke with several investors. Nobody seemed suspicious. Nobody seemed concerned. They saw the same trusted executive they had known for years. Ethan forced himself to behave exactly as he always would. He asked questions. He reviewed numbers. He participated in conversations. The last thing he wanted was to alert Daniel that something had changed. Across the restaurant, Naomi was clearing plates from another table. She never looked in Ethan's direction, but he found himself grateful for that. The less attention she attracted, the safer she remained from whatever was unfolding. 30 minutes later, guests began leaving in larger numbers. The restaurant slowly grew quieter. Ethan finally stood and prepared to leave. Daniel approached him immediately. "Big day tomorrow," Daniel said with a familiar smile. "Everything is lining up perfectly." Ethan studied his face. For years he had considered Daniel one of the most dependable people in his life. Now he found himself searching for signs he had somehow missed. "That is the plan," Ethan replied calmly. Daniel nodded. "Get some rest. By this time tomorrow, we will be celebrating." Ethan smiled politely and shook his hand. "See you in the morning." As Daniel walked away, Ethan felt a strange sense of loss. Not because he knew the truth yet, but because he was beginning to suspect that the man he trusted might never have existed in the way he imagined. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath the night sky. Ethan entered a waiting car and instructed the driver to take him directly to company headquarters. Nearly an hour later, he stepped into a secure conference room where Marcus Reed was already waiting. Several documents were spread across the table. Marcus looked exhausted. "You came fast," he said. Ethan loosened his tie and sat down. "Show me what you found." Marcus slid a folder across the table. "At first I thought these were routine transactions." Ethan opened the file. Rows of numbers filled the pages. Consulting agreements, financial transfers, corporate partnerships. Nothing immediately alarming. "Keep reading," Marcus said. Ethan turned another page. Then another. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Several outside investment groups had been acquiring small but strategic positions connected to companies involved in tomorrow's merger. On their own, the purchases looked ordinary. Together, they formed something much larger. "Who controls these groups?" Ethan asked. Marcus slid another document forward. Ethan looked at the names listed on the page. Then his eyes stopped. One name appeared repeatedly through indirect connections and advisory relationships. Daniel Mercer. Ethan stared at the document in silence. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Marcus folded his arms. "I checked everything twice." Ethan slowly looked up, and Marcus met his gaze. "If these records are accurate, someone has been positioning themselves for control long before this merger was announced." Ethan looked back at the documents. Naomi's warning echoed in his mind. The note, the conversations, the secret meetings, the unauthorized access request. For the first time, all the pieces were beginning to fit together. The clock on the conference room wall showed 1:17 a.m., but neither Ethan nor Marcus seemed aware of the time. Document after document covered the table between them. Financial reports, partnership agreements, internal communications. Individually, none of them appeared extraordinary. Together, they revealed a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. Ethan leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. The deeper they looked, the more one name continued to appear. Daniel Mercer. Not directly, never openly, always through layers of intermediaries, consulting firms, and investment partnerships. It was sophisticated, careful, designed to avoid attention. Marcus pointed to another page. This company acquired voting influence through 3 separate entities. Ethan studied the chart. "And those entities connect back to Daniel?" Marcus nodded. "Through advisory contracts." Ethan exhaled slowly. 12 years. 12 years of trust. 12 years of believing they were building the same future. He looked across the table at Marcus. How long has this been happening? Marcus glanced at the documents. At least 18 months. The answer hit harder than Ethan expected. This was not a sudden decision, not an impulsive mistake. If the records were accurate, the groundwork had been laid long before the merger discussions even began. Someone had been preparing for this outcome for a very long time. The room fell silent. Outside the glass walls of headquarters, Manhattan remained alive with scattered lights. Most of the city was sleeping. Ethan wished he could do the same. Instead, he was discovering that one of the closest people in his professional life might have been working toward a completely different goal. Suddenly, Marcus's laptop chimed. An incoming file. He opened it immediately. What is that? Ethan asked. Marcus frowned. Another anonymous submission. Ethan sat forward. Open it. Marcus clicked the file. A series of emails appeared on the screen. Internal communications. Meeting schedules. Strategic planning notes. Then one message caught Ethan's attention immediately. He read it twice. Then a third time. The sender was not Daniel. The recipient was not Daniel. Yet the message referred to him directly. Tomorrow after the vote, the transition becomes easier. He still believes Mercer is protecting his interests. Ethan felt his chest tighten. There it was. Not suspicion. Not interpretation. A written statement confirming exactly what Naomi had feared from the beginning. Marcus looked at him carefully. You all right? Ethan stared at the screen. No, it was the first honest answer he had given all night. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand. Ethan looked away. The disappointment was deeper than anger. Anger would have been simpler. Anger belonged to enemies. This felt different. It felt like losing something he thought was real. For years, Daniel had celebrated victories beside him. He had attended company milestones, shared strategy sessions, sat across from him during difficult negotiations. Ethan had trusted him with information few people ever received. Now every memory felt uncertain. Every conversation required a second look. Marcus closed the laptop. The board meeting starts in less than 8 hours. Ethan nodded. Then we finish this tonight. Marcus gathered several folders. There is one more thing. Ethan looked up. What? Marcus hesitated. Based on everything we found, tomorrow is not really about the merger. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Marcus met his eyes. The merger is only the vehicle. Ethan remained silent. Marcus continued. The real objective appears to be control of Caldwell Technologies. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Ethan stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Naomi's warning echoed in his memory. Do not trust the man behind you. At the time, it sounded impossible. Now it felt prophetic. Somewhere across Manhattan, a waitress was probably finishing her shift and heading home. She had no board position, no corporate title, no influence in financial markets. Yet she had seen the truth before anyone else. And unless Ethan acted before sunrise, everything she had risked to tell him might be too late. By 7:30 the next morning, Caldwell Technologies headquarters was already buzzing with activity. Executives moved through the lobby carrying tablets and coffee cups. Board members arrived in dark suits. Investors gathered in private meeting rooms. To everyone else, it looked like the beginning of a historic day. Only Ethan knew how close the company had come to losing its future. He entered the boardroom with a calm expression and took his seat at the head of the table. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, now glowing beneath the morning sun. One by one, directors filled the room. Then Daniel Mercer arrived. He looked confident, relaxed, exactly as he always did before major meetings. He greeted board members warmly and exchanged a brief nod with Ethan before taking his seat. If he felt any concern, he showed none of it. The meeting began promptly at 8 o'clock. Daniel stood first. For nearly 40 minutes, he delivered a polished presentation supporting the merger. Charts filled the screens. Revenue projections climbed upward. Strategic opportunities were highlighted. Several directors appeared impressed. Others nodded as he spoke. Watching him, Ethan understood why the plan had nearly succeeded. Daniel was persuasive, intelligent, patient. He had spent years earning trust. When the presentation ended, a director smiled. It appears everything is ready for a vote. Several heads nodded in agreement. Daniel sat down confidently. For a brief moment, silence settled across the room. Then Ethan stood. Every eye turned toward him. He walked slowly to the front of the room and connected a secure drive to the presentation system. The first document appeared on the screen. The room immediately grew quieter. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone. He simply presented facts, consulting agreements, financial relationships, indirect ownership structures, voting influence acquired through outside entities. One document led to another, then another. Directors leaned forward in their seats. Questions began appearing on their faces. The atmosphere changed. Ethan continued. Every piece of information had been verified overnight by internal security and outside counsel. Nothing on the screen relied on rumors. Nothing depended on assumptions. It was evidence. Clear. Organized. Undeniable. Daniel's expression slowly changed. The confidence that had defined his presentation began to fade. A director interrupted. Why are these entities connected to people involved in the merger? Another director spoke immediately afterward. Why was this information never disclosed? More questions followed. The boardroom transformed from a routine vote into an investigation. Ethan remained calm throughout. He answered what he could and allowed the documents to speak for themselves. Then Marcus Reed entered the room carrying additional records. Several directors requested copies immediately. Others began reviewing pages in silence. The mood had shifted completely. By the time the final document appeared, nobody was discussing merger projections anymore. They were discussing governance, transparency, and accountability. Nearly 2 hours later, the chairman of the board cleared his throat. The room became silent once again. Given the information presented today, he said carefully, the merger vote will be suspended pending a full, independent review. No one objected. The decision was unanimous. Ethan looked across the table. Daniel sat motionless. For the first time in 12 years, he looked like a stranger. Not because Ethan hated him, not because he wanted revenge, but because trust had been replaced by truth. One by one, directors gathered their materials and left the room. Conversations filled the hallways outside. Lawyers were already scheduling follow-up meetings. Auditors were being contacted. The plan that had taken months to construct was collapsing before lunchtime. As the room emptied, Ethan remained standing beside the window overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly below. And through all the noise of the morning, he found himself thinking about a waitress wearing a black apron who had quietly handed him a folded note and changed everything. 3 days later, the headlines were still discussing the suspended merger. Financial analysts debated what would happen next. Investors speculated about leadership changes. Reporters searched for answers. Yet inside the Sterling Prime, life moved forward as it always had. Guests arrived. Reservations filled. Glasses clinked beneath crystal chandeliers. The city skyline shimmered beyond the towering windows. And Naomi Brooks was back at work wearing the same black apron she had worn the night everything changed. Most people who passed her table had no idea how much courage one quiet decision had required. They saw a waitress carrying menus. They did not see the person who had altered the course of a billion-dollar company. Naomi preferred it that way. Late that afternoon, she was organizing silverware near the service station when the restaurant manager approached. "Someone is here to see you," he said. Naomi looked surprised. "For me?" The manager nodded. "Private dining room 7. Naomi thanked him and walked through the restaurant. The farther she moved from the main dining area, the quieter everything became. When she reached the room and opened the door, she stopped. Ethan Caldwell was standing beside a window overlooking the Hudson River. Sunlight reflected across the water behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan smiled. It was different from the smile she remembered from the dinner. Softer, more genuine. "I hope I am not interrupting your shift," he said. Naomi stepped inside. "Not at all." Ethan motioned toward a chair, but she remained standing. "How are things?" she asked. Ethan laughed quietly. "Complicated." The answer made both of them smile. For a few seconds, they simply looked out at the city. Then Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and carefully unfolded a small piece of paper. Naomi immediately recognized it. The note. The same note she had slipped beneath his napkin days earlier. "You kept it," she said. "I did." Ethan looked down at the paper. "I think this might be the most valuable thing anyone has ever handed me." Naomi shook her head. It was only a warning. Ethan looked directly at her. "No, it was a choice." The room fell silent again. Ethan walked toward the window. "Do you know what surprised me the most?" he asked. Naomi waited. "Not the investigation. Not the documents. Not even the betrayal." He turned toward her. "The fact that the only person willing to tell me the truth was Someone who owed me nothing. Naomi lowered her eyes slightly. Ethan continued. Executives, consultants, attorneys, investors. I had all of them around me. He smiled softly. And somehow the bravest person in the room was a waitress. Naomi felt emotion rise in her chest, but remained quiet. Ethan placed a business card on the table between them. This is not charity, he said immediately. And it is not a reward. Naomi looked at the card. Then what is it? Ethan folded the note one last time and slipped it back into his pocket. An opportunity. He smiled. Because people who notice what others miss are incredibly valuable. Naomi finally laughed. The tension of the previous week seemed to fade from both of them. Outside, ferries moved across the river while sunlight danced across the water. The city continued its endless motion. Ethan looked out the window one final time. A few days earlier, he believed power came from wealth, influence, and control. Now he understood something different. Wealth could buy attention. Influence could open doors. Power could command a room. But none of those things could replace character. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not sitting at the head of the table. Sometimes she is the one quietly serving it. And sometimes all it takes to change the future is the courage to speak when everyone else chooses silence.